When I moved into the Westview Meadows community, I didn't expect much trouble. I'd just taken a new position across state lines, and I wanted a quiet home where I could care for my younger sister, Elise. She's been in a wheelchair since the accident, and her needs are simple. Flat surfaces, working ramps, and the basic dignity to live without stares or pity. Westview had the accessible townhouse, the quiet cul-de-sac, and a ramp already installed out front. What it also had, and what the real estate agent failed to mention, was HOA President Beverly Langley. Beverly was the type of woman whose life peaked in high school when she ran the yearbook committee and hasn't stopped trying to manage everyone else's business since. Platinum hair, plastic smile, clipboard glued to her arm. On day 2 of our move-in, she dropped off a 40-page handbook of HOA rules wrapped in a pink bow like it was a welcome gift. On page 7, she'd highlighted "No unsightly modifications to front-facing property," and attached a sticky note. "This includes ramps and medical equipment." Smiley face. I ignored her. Elise needed the ramp. It wasn't even new. It had been installed by the previous owner who had a heart condition and used a walker. The first real incident came a week later. Elise had rolled down the ramp to meet me at the mailbox, and Beverly swooped in like a hawk circling prey. I watched from the driveway as Beverly crouched and put on her best saccharine voice. "Oh, honey. You must feel so brave coming out here all by yourself." Elise, never one to accept condescension, responded with a smile. "You're very brave too. I hear face fillers can be risky at your age." I laughed. Beverly turned scarlet and stomped off. That night, our mailbox was stuffed with corrective notices. For trash cans being left out an extra hour, for unauthorized architectural features, the ramp again, and for a lack of community uniformity. I let it go, until the day Beverly crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. It was a Saturday. Elise had spent the morning baking. I just finished a case review when I heard her scream. By the time I ran outside, she was halfway down the ramp, or rather what was left of it. 2 bolts had been loosened, and the wood gave way when she tried to descend. Her wheelchair pitched forward. I got there in time to stop her from toppling over the edge entirely, but the fall left her scraped and shaken. We called the police. The responding officer was sympathetic, but non-committal. "No cameras? No witnesses?" He shrugged. "Could have been kids." Elise looked at him. "Kids don't unscrew bolts and leave nasty notes in mailboxes." We knew who did it. Beverly didn't even try to hide her smirk when I confronted her. "Maybe if you spent less time babying her, she'd be stronger," she said. "And really, that ramp was a violation from the start. You should thank me for addressing a safety hazard." My hand clenched around the folder I was holding. She didn't know. No one in the neighborhood did. I hadn't told anyone my profession. My name wasn't listed in the local directory. I didn't attend HOA meetings. I dressed casually and worked from home. To them, I was just a protective sibling. They didn't know I was Judge Annalise R. Warren, Ninth Circuit Appellate Court, the same one known for her blistering legal dissents, her iron control of the courtroom, and the nickname whispered across legal circles: the Velvet Gavel. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I simply looked Beverly in the eyes and said, "You've made a grievous mistake." She laughed in my face, but she wouldn't be laughing long. The day after Elisa's fall, she stayed in bed, sore and silent. I sat beside her, holding her hand. No one had ever treated her as less than human before, not in my presence, and certainly not with the malicious audacity Beverly had shown. This wasn't about neighborhood aesthetics anymore. This was about power, abuse of it, and the length someone like Beverly would go to protect her paper crown. Elise turned to me sometime in the afternoon and whispered, "Are you going to let her get away with this?" I smiled gently. Not a chance. But I wouldn't storm into her precious HOA meeting. I wouldn't scream on her doorstep. Beverly was the kind of person who lived for that kind of spectacle. It gave her relevance. No, I'd dismantle her empire the way I dismantled corrupt corporations and egomaniacal attorneys. Quietly, thoroughly, and with irreversible precision. First step: gather evidence. I pulled open my office closet and brought out a case file box labeled simply, Texas v. Holloway, It wasn't what was inside that mattered. It was the small device tucked under the lid, my old courthouse-grade audio recorder. Slender, discreet, court-admissible. That evening, while most of the neighborhood was attending Beverly's monthly sip and settle wine social, I strolled casually around the HOA community building with Elise in tow. The clubhouse ramp was in perfect shape. Freshly painted, polished handrails, and not a single screw out of place. Elise rolled her eyes and said, "Funny how ramps are only ugly when they belong to us." Inside, Beverly clinked wine glasses with board members and pretended to care about landscaping budgets. I left Elise near the entry and wandered close enough to catch snippets of conversation. "She's so dramatic," Beverly was saying. "It's not like she was hurt. Maybe the chair tipped a bit. But honestly, I think it was an accident waiting to happen." Someone mumbled in agreement. "And the sisters know better," she continued. "Probably lives off government disability. The freeloading kind. You let those people move in and suddenly your home value drops overnight." I clenched my jaw and walked back outside before I could blow the whole operation. Later that night, the recorder played every word back. Beverly's voice clear, her slander undeniable. That would be enough to file a formal complaint, maybe even a civil suit. But it wasn't enough for me. Not yet. I needed to unravel her, discredit, disband, and expose. So I reached out to an old friend. Assistant U.S. Attorney Daniel Cho was one of the few people who knew the full scope of my jurisdictional pull and my unwillingness to bluff. We met for coffee under the pretense of reconnecting. By the time the cups were empty, I had everything I needed. Names, records, and a clean legal window. What I learned from Daniel stunned me and gave me the ammunition I needed. Turns out, Beverly had been siphoning money from the HOA budget into shell beautification funds. Her landscaping company, owned by her cousin. The playground she bragged about installing, grossly overbilled. Her own home, just happened to receive upgrades every quarter. All filed under curb appeal initiatives. I traced the money trail and printed every paper. I collected security footage from a neighbor across the street showing Beverly approaching our ramp the night before Elisa's fall. It was grainy, but damning. She reached down with a wrench, unbolted, smirked, walked off. I had motive, I had means, and now I had method. But before I filed the official complaint, I wanted Beverly to feel the walls closing in. So I did what I do best. I let the truth leak in just the right places. At the next HOA meeting, I anonymously submitted the audio recording to several board members, along with a bullet-pointed timeline of budget inconsistencies and contractor overlaps. Then I requested to be added to the agenda as a guest speaker. Beverly didn't recognize the name I used, A.R. Warren. She would. I wore black that night. Slacks, blouse, flats. Nothing flashy, just court neutral. Elise wore a subtle smirk and rolled in beside me. Her bandaged elbow was still visible. I caught Beverly looking and faltering, but she quickly dismissed me with the same arrogance as always. The board chair introduced me, fumbling the pronunciation of my name. I stepped up, took a breath, and said the line I'd been waiting to deliver. "My name is Judge Annalise R. Warren, Ninth Circuit Appellate. I've overseen federal abuse of power cases for 16 years. And tonight, I'm here because the person sitting across from me committed multiple violations of federal, state, and disability law against my sister." Dead silence. Beverly blinked. The room tilted, and the hammer, figuratively and soon literally, was about to drop. I didn't expect to win the HOA board election. I expected to dismantle it. It started with my name on the ballot. Annalise R. Warren, resident. No mention of my career. No mention of my judicial history. I didn't need credentials to win hearts. I needed truth, strategy, and a few well-timed revelations. The next board meeting was a packed house. We met at the local community center, folding chairs arranged in rows. Karen, Stan, the retired fire marshal from across the street, brought popcorn. I noticed a few new faces, neighbors who had never attended before. That was my doing. I canvassed quietly, neighbor to neighbor, knocking on doors and listening to concerns. Turns out, people didn't love Beverly. They feared her, her fines, her threats, her passive-aggressive notes in mailboxes. One resident, a mother of two, told me Beverly tried to fine her for leaving sidewalk chalk drawings overnight. Another family had received 3 warnings for wind chimes that were too whimsical. Westview Meadows wasn't a neighborhood. It was a dictatorship wrapped in flower beds. So when I stood up to deliver my candidacy statement, I wasn't Judge Annalise R. Warren. I was their neighbor, their advocate. "Good evening," I began. "My name is Annalise. I moved here with my sister Elise because I believed in the promise of this neighborhood: peace, community, and mutual respect. I've come to learn that we are living under selective enforcement, arbitrary punishments, and intimidation disguised as order." Beverly shifted in her seat. I continued, "My sister was injured recently. Some called it an accident. I believe it was negligence at best, and hate at worst." The room was dead silent. "I don't believe in yelling. I don't believe in vendettas. I believe in the law, in fairness, and in accountability." Then I smiled. The same smile I wear when an overconfident attorney in my courtroom realizes their entire case is falling apart. If elected, I will push for an independent legal review of all HOA actions from the past 5 years. I will freeze enforcement of fines until due process standards are adopted. And I will personally see to it that ADA compliance is no longer a suggestion but a requirement. The room exploded into applause. Beverly's face was frozen, pale. For the first time, she didn't have a response. She didn't need one. The vote took place 2 weeks later. I won in a landslide. My first act on the board was to suspend all pending fines and violations. I motioned to form a committee, made up of neutral residents and outside counsel, to review policy fairness and legal risk. My second act was to draft a formal complaint against Beverly Langley for discrimination, for harassment, and for personal injury related to ADA violations. Beverly tried to fight back, of course. She attempted to call a special meeting, claimed I had manipulated the vote. When that didn't work, she tried to challenge my eligibility, claimed I hadn't paid an HOA fee on time. That's when I finally let her have it. During the next public board meeting, I presented a video montage, footage from doorbell cameras. Neighbors had been very cooperative. Audio from a recorded phone call with Beverly, where she casually referred to Elise as that burden in a chair. Photos of the damaged ramp. Sworn statements from neighbors describing her behavior. Then I stood, walked to the front of the room, and set a folder on the table. "My name," I said, "is Judge Annalise Rebecca Warren, 9th Circuit, appointed by the President, confirmed by the Senate. And when I say Beverly Langley is a legal liability to this HOA, I don't say it as a resident. I say it as a federal officer of the court." Gasps. A few audible "oh my God." Beverly sat back down. She didn't speak for the rest of the meeting. ChatGPT said, "Absolutely, time to deliver the final verdict. Here's Chapter 4. The judgment, where the gavel finally comes down on Beverly, and the neighborhood gets the reckoning it deserves." Chapter 4. The judgment. Narrative format, cinematic and emotional, continuing the 5,000-word storytelling style. They say power reveals character. If that's true, then losing power rips it wide open. After the public board meeting, the neighborhood was never the same. Not in the way a hurricane leaves behind destruction, but in the way a long drought ends with a cleansing rain. You could feel it in the sidewalks, in the voices of neighbors laughing again, in Elisa's confident return to her daily routines. Ramp proudly reinforced with industrial steel and decorated with rainbow windsocks she picked out just to spite Beverly's uniformity clause. The HOA investigation committee was fully operational within a month of my election. Composed of a retired civil rights attorney, an ADA consultant, a mother of a disabled child, and 2 longtime residents, we combed through 5 years of files. We didn't do it quietly either. Every citation, every fine, every complaint issued under Beverly's rule was subject to review. The results? Over 70% of fines were deemed improperly issued. Several were retaliatory. At least a dozen targeted families with children, disabled residents, or immigrants, always couched in coded language like community standards or visual harmony. Beverly was summoned to answer for it at the next HOA disciplinary hearing. She didn't show. Instead, she sent a lawyer, a local guy with a cheap suit and the arrogant belief that he was about to school a neighborhood board. That is, until he saw me sitting at the head of the committee. His eyes widened. I nodded once and opened my folder. Shall we begin? The hearing was held in the town's council hall. We needed more space. More residents wanted to attend than any of us anticipated. I called witnesses, showed photographic evidence, laid out a timeline of systemic targeting, culminating in Elisa's injury. The final piece? Signed affidavit from a former board member who had since moved away, confessing that Beverly had orchestrated the removal of the ramp, citing it as an eyesore in a private email exchange. That email was now part of a federal ADA investigation. When I finished, the room was silent. I looked up from my notes and said, "It is the unanimous recommendation of this committee that Beverly Langley be removed from all positions of authority within the HOA and barred from holding any leadership roles moving forward. Furthermore, a formal apology will be issued to all residents cited inappropriately, and Elise Warren will receive a publicly funded grant to support accessible infrastructure improvements. Not as a favor, as a reparation." The motion passed 5-0. Beverly's lawyer tried to object. I didn't let him. "This isn't a court of law," I said. "But if you'd like to take this to one, I'll see you there in robes." He sat down. Quietly, Beverly sold her home 3 weeks later. The moving truck came at 6 a.m. on a Sunday. No one came to help. She left behind her garden gnomes, a dying rose bush, and 3 unpaid HOA fines, which we chose to forgive in the spirit of irony. The neighborhood has changed since then. The HOA board is diverse, reasonable, and, for the first time in years, kind. We built a community garden where Beverly once tried to install a private dog run. We turned the clubhouse into an inclusive space with ramps, braille signage, and quiet hours. We even named one of the neighborhood trails after Elise. Elise Lane. She cried when she saw the sign. I didn't, but I did smile. 2 years later, most people in the neighborhood know me as just Annalise. They still don't say "Judge" when they knock on my door. They just wave, bring cookies, or ask about garden mulch. And I like it that way. Elise and I sit on the front porch most evenings. Her chair has a custom motor upgrade now, one she picked out herself. It's red, shiny, with a cup holder and Bluetooth speakers. She wheels down Elise Lane sometimes just to hear her name echoed on the breeze. Kids on bikes wave at her like she's a local celebrity. She is. The ramp? Still there. Still reinforced. Still standing. It's got fairy lights now and wind chimes. Sometimes people stop and stare. Not in a bad way, in a welcoming way. Last fall, I hosted a barbecue in the backyard. About 30 people came. The same neighbors who once feared HOA retaliation now brought potato salad and folding chairs. I caught a moment during cleanup. Elise laughing with Tasha, Stan dancing to an old Motown track, kids running through the sprinkler. It hit me then, in a quiet way. We didn't just win. We changed something. Not just the rules. Not just the leadership. But the culture. We turned fear into fairness. Control into community. And prejudice into purpose. My gavel still sits in my study. I don't use it often anymore. Most of my cases these days are pro bono. ADA advocacy. Accessibility law reform. Community speaking. The kind of work that echoes beyond one courtroom. But when I sit on this porch watching Elise smile, I know this was the most important judgment I've ever delivered. And I didn't need a robe to do it. Just a ramp. And a reason.